Minister, as I said, announced that National Cabinet today are working on a code of practice for commercial and residential landlords and tenants as coronavirus continues to impact. Now, we thought we might have a formal announcement today. It's clear we don't. But there's a lot of detail that I want to talk to with my next guest. Dr. Andrew Wilson is the Chief Economist for My Housing Market. He joins me now via Skype. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Wilson. Look, I want to go back a fortnight or so ago, and the PM, I think, was very gracious, very understanding that there would be tenants who hit the wall in all of this. I fear, however, that a lot of people are using it as an excuse not to pay their rent, which is causing ructions for landlords. And we have a similar issue in the commercial sector, albeit there are some businesses, some shops, some small players that are really going belly up, but the big commercial outfits in shopping centres and others aren't cutting them any slack. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. How do we get through this?
Well, I think that can of worms just keeps getting bigger, doesn't it, Peter? And when we've focused on residential tenancies, I guess, in terms of tenants being unable to pay their rent, perhaps accessing their super, we really are in early days, you expect, in terms of this being an issue. But of course, the bigger can of worms is the commercial property sector. And, good luck with trying to provide relief there, because for every, tenant that gets relief, there's a landlord that has to get relief as well. And a lot of our financial infrastructure relies on commercial property sector. Superannuation funds are big investors in commercial property. And we've had this, almost across the board shutdown in businesses, in commercial businesses. And that means, of course, that there's going to be difficulties in paying rent. And that means that the income from that rent to landlords is also going to be an issue in terms of, financial outcomes. And, good luck with trying to manage this process. It's almost, a hopeless choice in a way that for every positive you can bring into the position, that there's another negative that pops up.
And it's really just an issue of, trying to get back to work as quickly as possible.
I think it's also a matter of good faith. I mean, I do think that the tossing out, be it commercial or residential, a tenant at this time means you're likely to have a vacant property. I don't think that there's the market necessarily that will mean you'll turn that property over quickly and get another tenant in next week. So let's all be very alive to that fact. But the grace that the Prime Minister was talking about to be given to tenants who have lost their jobs and can't pay their rent isn't licensed for everyone to stop paying their commitments if they can meet them. And this is another issue where, particularly, and I think here of self-funded retirees, anyone who's without work can go on the dole, and those that their employers are still backing them in can go on this new job seeker allowance. If you're on the pension, there's been an increase. But if you're a self-funded retiree, you've already had a significant drop with all the RBA changes on rates for your investment profile. If you've got money in the bank, you've been hit by the share market. If you might have a modest flat and you live off that income, if the tenant doesn't pay the rent, you really are in the worst position of pretty much anyone in Australia.
Well, that's right. And, of course, your expenditure doesn't stop as well. I mean, you mentioned perhaps some land tax relief, but there's other outgoings that small-scale landlords have to continue to pay. And if we think about some of the sectors that have been really savagely hit by the coronavirus issue, we look at the leisure industry, and those that have holiday accommodation as an investment property certainly have been hard done by in terms of really the holiday market having virtually collapsed. And, again, those landlords have to continue with their outgoings, to pay their outgoings, and without an income source, with small-scale operators, that becomes a real significant issue of financial stress. And as I said, for every...
How does the government thread the needle, Andrew?
I don't think, there are no solutions to this other than let's get back to work as quickly as we can within, of course, the parameters of the health environment that this is all about. And the longer we go with this, the more damage it's going to do over the longer term. And property markets don't adjust quickly. They're particularly residential property markets are really built on momentum. And I think that, if we are faced with another 3 months in prospect of a shutdown, we're going to take, some time for residential property markets to bring themselves back up to almost a a reasonable environment, and that could be at least into next year.
That is a salient reminder, because, of course, for most Australians, pretty much every Australian, our biggest asset is
Absolutely.
our home, even if most of it's owned by the bank. And also our household indebtedness is, if not the highest in the world, close to the very top of those rankings. So that's got to be a cause for concern.
Well, look, that's right. And our housing markets had actually got back to a reasonable level after having, a savage hit at the end of 2018 and into 2019. And we had the prospect of markets having some sort of an equilibrium by the end of this year. Melbourne and Sydney had grown quite strongly at the start of the year, but they were still below where they were 3 years ago. And then out of the blue, of course, we have this. This is going to be a significant hit to the property industry, which was just starting to recover. And of course, there are a lot of other issues if properties hit. There's also income through stamp duty and as we mentioned, land tax. It really works its way right through the system.
I started at the top of the show saying that everything in the economy is connected to everything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a truism, but it's a reality. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Andrew Wilson.